We are facing a dramatic turning point in global politics and international trade that directly affects millions of people in the United States. India, once seen as a close ally of Washington and a counterbalance to China, is taking a radical turn, not toward neutrality, but clearly against the United States. For many in this country, this shift is shocking. While we have grown accustomed to constant news about U.S. tariffs, new sanctions, and increasingly restrictive global trade, this decision strikes directly at the heart of a symbol of American economic power. Apple. The announcement that India is not only considering stopping future Apple factories but also freezing existing production lines is interpreted by analysts as a potentially severe blow to the global economy. Some critics argue that President Trump's decision to impose tariffs on a wide range of Indian products, from textiles to pharmaceuticals, may have been a political message amid an election campaign. However, the reality is that India perceives it as a humiliation. Observers warn that New Delhi is ready to use its economic strength not only to grow, but also as a pressure tool in international relations. In the United States, this situation becomes tangible when considering that India is now one of the most important centers for iPhone production. The 12th, 13th, and 14th models are already manufactured in plants located in Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, and according to Counterpoint research, by 2027, nearly a quarter of all iPhones worldwide will be assembled in India. Billions of dollars have been invested, contracts signed with thousands of workers, and suddenly all of that is at risk. Experts suggest this crisis would affect not only Apple but also U.S. stock markets and employment. Even more serious is the geopolitical aspect between India and China. After decades of rivalry, they now hold secret talks in Dubai and Jakarta, discussing joint energy projects and trade in national currencies. If this cooperation deepens, the United States will lose much more than a market. It will lose the key competitor against China that it so desperately needs in the power struggle in Asia. Western media, such as The Guardian, are already calling it a geopolitical earthquake. From the perspective of many Americans, a paradox emerges. Trump tried to pressure India with tariffs, but it seems this has brought New Delhi closer to Beijing. While the White House, according to Reuters, is considering retaliation such as limiting the presence of Indian tech companies in the U.S. or tightening visa rules for specialists, many citizens wonder if Washington is not harming itself. After all, Indian engineers represent an essential part of innovation in Silicon Valley. The growing impression is that this escalation carries more risks than opportunities. The decisive question is whether we are witnessing the end of a strategy that for years positioned India as a partner within the Asian balance of power against China. And if so, what impact would this have on the economic security of American society? While many still try to grasp the magnitude of this change, it is clear that this is not just about Apple's future, but about the very foundations of U.S. economic policy in Asia. For decades, the United States bet on a balance, considering India as a democratic counterweight to China's authoritarian power. But now we see that balance beginning to crumble. For Washington, establishing Apple plants in India represented a double victory. On the one hand, it created tens of thousands of local jobs and strengthened access to the rapidly growing Indian smartphone market. On the other hand, it was a geopolitical message, a sign that U.S. tech production should not depend exclusively on China. However, now it seems that New Delhi, according to Bloomberg, is not only considering blocking new investments but also freezing ongoing projects, which could turn this plan into a real setback. For many Americans who see Apple products as part of their daily lives, this may sound distant or hard to understand. But experts warn that if India decides to act firmly, supply chains could be disrupted, prices would rise, and stock markets could suffer a sharp decline. We have seen before how U.S. tariffs triggered a domino effect in global trade, from steel and agriculture to, more recently, semiconductors. Critics argue that the current escalation with India carries similar risks, only this time it affects the tech industry, considered the vital core of the modern global economy. What makes this situation even more delicate is that India is no longer the country dependent on U.S. aid. It was 2 decades ago. Today, it has its own economic tools that it can strategically employ. The Ministry of Commerce in New Delhi has made it clear that it is willing to use its economic power as a political pressure instrument. This means that for the United States, the known rules of the game no longer apply. Moreover, there is a geopolitical dimension that adds complexity to the matter. Reports of secret meetings between Indian and Chinese delegations discussing energy projects, monetary agreements, and joint stances for the upcoming BRICS summit have caught the attention of many analysts in Washington. Some observers even warn that the U.S. could be losing a strategic advantage over China due to its own trade policy. In everyday American life, this translates into global tensions that could be reflected in increased consumer product prices. Many families already feel the weight of inflation and stock market volatility. The possibility that one of the country's most profitable companies could get caught in international conflicts creates even more uncertainty. Some experts suggest that the U.S. government is caught at a crossroads. If it responds with more punitive measures, it risks provoking an escalation that would affect both Silicon Valley and the national labor market. But if it chooses restraint, it could send a signal of weakness that other international partners might exploit. Thus, Washington faces a dilemma that involves not only its political leaders, but raises a crucial question. How much economic stability are we willing to sacrifice to demonstrate strength in foreign policy? For many Americans, it is increasingly clear that this is not just a trade dispute between Washington and New Delhi, but a turning point in international relations that could define the future of the entire global economy. While Trump insists that his tariffs aim to protect American jobs, on the other side it is observed that India now has enough economic power to respond confidently. Critics argue that Washington has underestimated the new reality. India is no longer that smaller partner that unquestioningly accepts U.S. conditions, but an independent power center defending its interests globally. Experts point out that India is one of the largest smartphone markets on the planet, with over 1.4 billion inhabitants and hundreds of millions of new consumers in the premium segment. For this reason, Apple has invested billions in recent years to shift its production there. Companies like Foxconn, Pegatron, and Wistron operate factories at full capacity, with contracts signed for thousands of workers, and yet now face the threat of a total shutdown. Some analysts warn that this not only puts Apple at risk but also the credibility of U.S. economic strategies. Additionally, Indian media such as Hindustan Times note that Washington has underestimated India's growing strength, which now possesses its own economic and political levers. The situation becomes even more delicate when considering the growing closeness between India and China. The South China Morning Post has revealed confidential meetings in Dubai and Jakarta, where India and China discussed joint energy projects and the possibility of conducting transactions in their national currencies. If this strategic alliance consolidates, it would pose a huge challenge for U.S. economic policy, as the dollar, until now the main tool of U.S. influence, could lose relevance. Experts warn of a possible geopolitical earthquake that would shake not only Washington but also global financial markets. For the American population, clear doubts arise. What would it mean if India stopped being a partner and became a rival? Would prices increase, or would the availability of products like iPhones become complicated? What impact would a recession in the tech sector have on employment in the United States? Meanwhile, according to Reuters, the White House is evaluating measures to counter this scenario, including restrictions on Indian tech companies in the country and reviewing visa programs for Indian professionals. However, these workers are considered the fundamental pillar of Silicon Valley, driving innovation at giants like Google, Microsoft, and numerous startups. Some specialists warn that these actions could weaken the U.S. innovation ecosystem. For many Americans, the administration seems trapped in a self-created dilemma. The more it pressures India, the greater the risk of harming itself. However, there is also fear that a retreat would be interpreted as a sign of weakness, equally dangerous. Tensions are rising, and for many in the U.S., this situation feels like a silent earthquake beginning to affect everyday life. Apple, and a true icon of American innovative capacity for decades, could become a key piece within this geopolitical board, a direct consequence of certain decisions regarding tariffs and global trade. For investors on Wall Street, the mere possibility of production in India halting represents a significant risk, given that Apple holds enormous weight in the capitalization of the U.S. stock market. Analysts suggest that a stoppage of its production lines would not only affect the company but also the Dow Jones and the Nasdaq. Critics argue that Washington's strategy of pressuring India through tariffs could backfire, as India does not respond with passive defenses but uses its position as one of the fastest-growing technology markets to strengthen its stance. The perspective of many Americans, it is difficult to understand why a partner built as a counterbalance to China now seems to seek closer ties with Beijing. Observers warn that secret meetings in Dubai and Jakarta, where issues of energy cooperation and monetary agreements were discussed, could profoundly change international relations in Asia. If India opts at the next BRICS summit for a payment system in rupees and yuan, the dollar would face a significant threat. For decades, it has been the central axis of U.S. economic policy, and now its influence could diminish. For American citizens, this would have significant consequences. A weakened dollar could make imports more expensive, increase inflation, and further complicate the daily lives of families. Many already feel the pressure of rising prices in food and energy, and now an increase in the cost of consumer goods like smartphones and laptops is looming. In the media realm, opinions vary. Some experts interpret this escalation as a necessary message to the world that Washington is not willing to give up. Others warn that a confrontation without considering economic repercussions could end up being more costly than beneficial. The Guardian described this situation as a self-inflicted geopolitical defeat, while Foreign Affairs emphasized that India is consolidating itself as an independent power center. For many Americans, this experience feels like déjà vu. Didn't we believe years ago that integrating China into global trade would make it a partner, only to discover it became the strongest competitor? There is a possibility that the same mistake will be repeated with India. The question that arises is, are tariff policies pushing a crucial ally out of American influence? And what does this imply for our role in the global economy of the 21st century? While Washington urgently seeks answers, a growing feeling in the U.S. is that a historic turning point has been reached. For many citizens, the escalation between India and the United States is not just an abstract issue of international relations, but a tangible threat to security and economic stability. The prospect that Apple, a company with a market capitalization close to $3 trillion, could be slowed down in India acts as a warning sign indicating that U.S. economic policy may be reaching its limits. Experts suggest that by 2027, nearly a quarter of all iPhones worldwide should be produced in India. However, this goal could now be at risk. Critics point out that Trump's aggressive tariff policy, though showing strength in the short term, could ultimately have the opposite effect, the loss of strategic partners. Observers warn that talks between India and China on joint energy projects and monetary agreements could not only weaken the dollar but also undermine the United States' position in global trade. In everyday life, this translates into rising prices of consumer goods, increased inflation, and greater pressure on the American middle class. Some analysts compare this situation to the time when the U.S. believed it could control China by integrating it into the world market, only to face the #1 competitor decades later. Today, a similar dynamic seems to be emerging with India. According to Reuters, the White House is considering measures such as restricting Indian tech companies or imposing stricter visa rules for specialized professionals. But these actions also carry risks, as Indian engineers represent the backbone of innovation in Silicon Valley. For many Americans, this paradox is evident. Every sanction against India could end up weakening the competitiveness of their own tech industry. The Guardian described this situation as a geopolitical earthquake, while the German Handelsblatt emphasized that Trump could be dismantling the entire Asian strategy of his predecessors. The atmosphere in the U.S. is divided. Some support a firm stance because they believe it is the only way to protect American interests. Others fear that this direction endangers jobs, welfare, and the United States' position in the global economy. For us, one crucial question remains. Are we witnessing the beginning of a new era in which the United States loses the ability to dictate the rules of global trade? Or will Washington manage to find a way to strengthen ties with India and protect the country's economic interests? This debate goes beyond a simple political phrase. It affects the future of our jobs, our technology, and our place in the world order. What do you think? Is it possible that U.S. tariff policy accelerates the formation of a new global alliance between India and China, putting its leadership in the 21st century at risk?